Imagine waking up on what should be the happiest day of your life to find your head completely shaved. Beside you, a note. This is my gift to you. My name is Walter, and that nightmare wasn't mine. It was my daughter's. After years of being erased from her life, I found her kneeling on a rain-soaked sidewalk, desperately trying to attach a cheap wig to her bare scalp, still wearing her wedding dress. What would you do if you discovered your own child didn't recognize you? What lengths would you go to when you learn that powerful people have systematically destroyed someone you love, changing her name, erasing her identity, and hiding a grandchild you never knew existed? I've spent my last days on Earth unraveling a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of society, all to answer one question: how do you save someone who doesn't remember they need saving? This is the story of how I lost my daughter twice and what I sacrificed to get her back. A story about family secrets, unimaginable cruelty, and the kind of love that refuses to die even when everything else has been taken away. If you want to hear the full story of what happened to Evelyn and the shocking truth I uncovered, make sure to follow this channel right now. Hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. This is just the beginning of a journey that will break your heart and then show you how to put it back together again. My name is Walter. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone in a cramped room behind a hardware store in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Everyone thinks I'm just another grumpy old man who complains about the price of milk. But what nobody knows is that exactly 12 years ago, I ran into my daughter on the street, and she didn't recognize me. It was a rainy February morning. I had gone downtown to drop off a resume, even though I knew nobody hires an old man with a broken spine and a past full of silence. It was there, at the corner of Bank Street and Pequannock, that I saw a woman kneeling on the wet sidewalk, trying to glue an old wig to her head. She was holding a bouquet of plastic flowers in her other hand, and she was trembling. I knew immediately it was Evelyn. But this wasn't the Evelyn I remembered. My sweet little girl with her light laughter and curious eyes was gone. What remained was just a shadow. No hair, no shoes, no direction. And I didn't know if I should approach her, because if I told her who I was, she might also remember. The day I was pushed out of her life without the right to defend myself. I stood there, frozen in the rain, watching my own daughter struggle with that pathetic wig. Each time she tried to secure it, the wind would lift a corner, revealing patches of her bare scalp. The sight crushed something inside me, a part I thought had died years ago. "Need some help, ma'am?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Evelyn looked up, her eyes vacant and red-rimmed. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, but then she just shook her head and returned to her desperate task. "I'm fine," she mumbled. "I just need to look presentable." Presentable. The word hung between us like a cruel joke. My little girl, who once twirled in summer dresses and demanded I watch her performances in the living room, was now kneeling in dirty rainwater, clutching plastic flowers and a dollar store wig. I should have walked away then. Should have respected the wall of years and lies between us. But instead, I knelt down beside her, my old knees creaking in protest. I took off my worn jacket and held it over her head to shield her from the rain. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "things fall apart so better things can come together." She looked at me then, really looked. My father used to say that. My heart stopped. Did he now? Before he abandoned us. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather instead of shattering my world. I swallowed hard. "Maybe there's more to that story than you know." She laughed, a hollow sound that bore no resemblance to the musical giggles I once lived for. "There always is, isn't there? Everyone has their excuses." She finally secured the wig, a terrible synthetic thing that didn't match her natural color. He chose to leave, just like my fiancé chose to leave. I wanted to scream the truth, that I never left. I was pushed away, that my sister Deborah had systematically erased me from Evelyn's life, rewriting history until I became nothing but a footnote. A shameful secret best forgotten. Instead, I said, "Can I buy you a cup of coffee? You look like you could use something warm." She hesitated, clutching those ridiculous plastic flowers like they were her last connection to sanity. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because I was a father once," I replied truthfully. "And I'd want someone to help my daughter if she was sitting in the rain." Something shifted in her expression then. A crack in the wall. She stood up, her wedding dress, God, she was wearing a wedding dress, soaked and dirty around her ankles. "I'm not going to marry him anymore," she said, as if I had asked. "Not after what his mother did." "What did she do?" I asked, even though every instinct warned me not to pry. Evelyn touched the wig self-consciously. "She gave me a present the night before the wedding." Her laugh was bitter now. "She said I wasn't good enough for her son. That trash like me would only bring shame to their family name." My hands curled into fists. Someone had hurt my little girl, violated her in a way I couldn't even comprehend. And where had I been? Hiding in the shadows, too weak to fight for my own child. "I woke up bald," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She drugged me and shaved my head while I slept. Left a note. 'This is my gift to you.' And the worst part? He knew. My fiancé knew what she was planning. The rage that surged through me then was unlike anything I'd felt in decades. It was primal, volcanic. I wanted names, addresses. I wanted to make them pay. But Evelyn was already walking away, her plastic flowers drooping in the rain. I followed at a distance, unable to let her go again. She moved like a ghost through the streets of Bridgeport, occasionally touching her wig to make sure it was still in place. When she finally turned a corner and disappeared into a homeless shelter on Maple Avenue, I sat on a bench across the street. Night fell. The rain stopped. Still, I waited. That was the beginning. The moment when I decided that no matter what it took, I would find out what had happened to my daughter in the years we'd been apart. I would discover who had turned my bright-eyed girl into this hollow shell, and then I would make it right, even if it cost me everything. What I didn't know then, sitting on that cold bench as February darkness swallowed the street, was that the trail would lead me through a maze of family secrets, corporate corruption, and a love story so twisted it would challenge everything I thought I knew about forgiveness. My name is Walter. I'm 72 years old. And this is the story of how I lost my daughter twice, and what I did to get her back. Evelyn was born in a public hospital in Hartford. Her mother, my wife, died 2 days after giving birth. From that moment on, my sister Deborah came to help. But slowly, she took over everything. When Evelyn was 6, Deborah made me sign temporary guardianship papers, claiming it was just to get school benefits. But that was the beginning of the end. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The smell of Deborah's cigarettes lingering in my small kitchen, the sound of cartoons playing in the background where Evelyn sat, oblivious to how her life was about to change. Deborah pushed the papers across my worn Formica table, her red-painted fingernail tapping impatiently on the dotted line. "It's just a formality, Walter," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The school needs it for their records. You know how these bureaucrats are. Sign here and you'll save us both a mountain of paperwork." I was exhausted, working double shifts at the factory just to keep a roof over our heads. The grief of losing Sarah still cut deep 3 years later. Some nights I'd wake up reaching for her, only to grasp cold sheets and renewed sorrow. I signed those papers without reading them. The biggest mistake of my life. By the time Evelyn was 10, she was already calling me Uncle Walter, with no memory of the Sunday afternoons I'd spent holding her on the couch, reading those tattered Dr. Seuss books over and over until she fell asleep against my chest. When I tried to reconnect with her, Deborah threatened to call the police. She said people like me, uneducated, working irregular hours, only held the girl back. I gave up. I stayed silent, and that was my first great mistake. Time passed. Evelyn grew up, enrolled in a community college, and met her fiancé, the son of a local businesswoman. Her mother-in-law-to-be, Darlene Ashcroft, was one of those women who smile with their teeth but kill with their eyes. The night before the wedding, Evelyn was taken to a fancy hotel, they said. But she woke up bald, and beside her was a note. "This is my gift to you. Signed, your mother-in-law." How do I know this? It took years of digging, of following breadcrumbs through the wreckage of my daughter's life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After that rainy day when I found Evelyn on the sidewalk, I began piecing together what had happened during our years apart. Deborah had moved them to the wealthier side of Hartford when Evelyn was 12. My court-ordered child support checks, which I never missed, not once, apparently funded piano lessons, ballet classes, and private tutoring, all designed to transform my daughter into someone presentable to society, someone who wouldn't remind anyone of her blue-collar father. The worst part? It worked. By 16, Evelyn spoke differently, dressed differently. The few times I was allowed to see her, always under Deborah's watchful eye, my daughter seemed like a stranger, a polished, careful girl who called me sir when she thought Deborah wasn't listening. "You don't need to call me that," I whispered once as we stood awkwardly in Deborah's manicured garden during a reluctant birthday visit. "What should I call you then?" she asked, genuine confusion in her eyes. Those eyes, so like her mother's, were the only part of her I still recognized. I wanted to say Dad. I wanted it so badly my chest ached. Instead, I mumbled, "Walter is fine." I lost her inch by inch, memory by memory. Deborah was methodical in her erasure of me. When Evelyn graduated high school, I wasn't invited. When she got her associate's degree, I learned about it weeks later from a neighbor who'd seen the announcement in the local paper. And then came the Ashcrofts. Old money, rumor had it, though most of their wealth was new, generated through Darlene's chain of medical supply companies. Their son, James, met Evelyn at the community college where she was studying nursing, and he was taking business classes as a fallback to his trust fund. He found her authentic, he reportedly told friends. A real person amidst the carefully curated rich kids he'd grown up with. What I learned, much later, was that Darlene had never approved. Not from day one. In her eyes, Evelyn would always be the scholarship girl, the charity case, the nurse in training who didn't know Chanel from Walmart. The engagement announcement came as a shock to everyone, especially Darlene. The wedding was planned for June at the Ashcroft estate. 300 guests, imported flowers, a dress that cost more than my yearly salary. I received no invitation, though I saw the engagement photo in the society pages of the Hartford Courant. My daughter, smiling nervously beside a tall young man with perfect teeth and empty eyes. The night before the wedding, tradition dictated that the bride and groom spend apart. Evelyn was escorted to the penthouse suite at the Marriott downtown, a gift from the mother-in-law. What happened next, I pieced together from hotel staff who remembered the incident, though they'd been paid handsomely to forget. Darlene visited late that evening, bringing champagne already poured in crystal flutes. "To welcome you to the family," she told my daughter. The drinks were drugged, of course, and while Evelyn slept, Darlene, or someone she hired, shaved my daughter's head completely. Every last strand of her chestnut hair gone, then left that note on the pillow beside her. "This is my gift to you." When Evelyn woke the next morning, her wedding day, she screamed so loudly that guests in neighboring rooms called security. By the time they arrived, she had locked herself in the bathroom. It took 3 hours to coax her out, by which time the wedding had been postponed, then canceled. James, her fiancé, never came to see her. He sent a text. "Mother says this is for the best. I'm sorry. Sorry." As if that word could possibly cover the humiliation, the cruelty, the calculated destruction of a young woman's most important day. I learned later that Darlene had thrown a cancellation party at the venue, telling guests that Evelyn had shown her true colors at the last minute. The whispers began immediately, that my daughter was unstable, that she'd tried to extort money from the family, that she'd been unfaithful. None of it was true. But Bridgeport is a small city with a long memory for scandal. By the time I found Evelyn with that wig on the sidewalk, she'd been living with the aftermath for months. No job, no fiancé, no future. Just the lingering shame of a wedding that never happened, and a cruelty so profound it had robbed her of even the basic dignity of her appearance. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the shaved head was just the beginning. Darlene Ashcroft's revenge was far more comprehensive than a single act of humiliation. She had systematically dismantled my daughter's entire existence, piece by piece, much as Deborah had once erased me from Evelyn's life. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. The circle of betrayal was complete. I only learned that story many years later. But now I understand that it was on that morning, seeing Evelyn with her soaked wig, that I made a decision that changed everything. I followed her. The rain had finally stopped as I watched her walk away from me, those plastic flowers dangling limply from her hand. Each step she took tore at something primal inside me, the instinct to protect that I'd suppressed for too many years. I stood there on that wet sidewalk, my arthritic knees throbbing, and made a choice that would either redeem me or destroy what little I had left. I followed my daughter, not close enough to frighten her, just near enough to make sure she was safe. She moved through the streets of Bridgeport like a ghost, this woman in a dirty wedding dress with a crooked wig that kept slipping in the breeze. People stared. Some laughed behind their hands. A group of teenagers outside the 7-Eleven pointed and snickered. I wanted to scream at them to tell them they were mocking my little girl, the same one who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair, laughing so hard she'd sometimes hiccup for hours afterward. Instead, I just kept pace about half a block behind, my heart hammering against my ribs every time she paused or turned slightly. She entered a homeless shelter on Maple Avenue, a converted church with peeling paint and a sign promising hope for the hopeless. The irony wasn't lost on me. I positioned myself on a bench across the street, pulling my worn jacket tighter against the February chill. The wood was still damp from the rain, soaking through my thin pants. I didn't care. I'd sit there all night if I had to. And I did. As darkness fell, I watched the shelter's windows light up one by one. Through the wavy glass, I could make out vague shapes of people lining up for dinner. I wondered if Evelyn was eating, if she still picked the onions out of her food the way she used to when she was small, if anyone in there knew that the woman in the terrible wig had once been loved so fiercely that her father would have died for her without hesitation. The temperature dropped as night deepened. My bones ached from the cold and stillness. Around midnight, a police cruiser slowed as it passed, the officer eyeing me suspiciously. I must have looked like just another homeless old man, which, in a way, I was. Home had ceased to exist for me the day Evelyn stopped knowing who I was. I dozed fitfully, waking with a start every time a car door slammed or voices grew loud nearby. By dawn, my mouth was dry and my muscles screamed in protest as I straightened on the bench, but I remained, eyes fixed on the shelter door, waiting. At 7:42 a.m., I remember checking my watch. Evelyn emerged. She'd changed clothes. The wedding dress was gone. Now she wore a faded blue sweater and jeans that hung loose on her thin frame. The wig was still there, slightly askew after a night's sleep. She clutched a small paper bag, probably breakfast, and began walking purposefully west. I rose stiffly to follow her, ignoring the shooting pain in my hip. She led me through 6 blocks of downtown, past commuters rushing to work and street vendors setting up their carts. Finally, she stopped at St. Mary's Church, a grand old stone building with stained glass windows that caught the morning light. She hesitated at the bottom of the steps, clutching that paper bag like it contained something precious. Then she went inside. I waited a respectful few minutes before following. The church was nearly empty, just a weekday morning service attended by a handful of elderly parishioners. Evelyn sat alone in the last pew, still wearing her veil. It wasn't white anymore, more of a dingy gray, but she'd arranged it carefully over the wig. She wasn't praying, just watching. As I slipped into a pew several rows behind her, I realized what was happening. A wedding, a small one, with perhaps 20 guests gathered near the altar. The bride was young, early 20s at most, and radiantly happy in a simple white dress. The The groom couldn't take his eyes off her. Their joy was palpable, filling the cavernous space with something warm and bright. And my daughter sat alone in the shadows, watching a stranger live the day that had been stolen from her. The sight nearly broke me. I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep from making a sound. This was intimacy of the most brutal kind, witnessing someone's private pain, their desperate attempt to recapture something lost. I shouldn't have been there. No one should have seen Evelyn like this. But I couldn't leave. Not again. The ceremony was brief. When it ended, the small wedding party moved down the aisle, laughing and wiping away tears. They passed within feet of Evelyn, but no one noticed the thin woman with the veil and strange wig. She was invisible to their happiness. Once they'd gone, Evelyn remained seated, staring at the now empty altar. I wanted so badly to go to her, to sit beside her and say, "I'm here. I've always been here." But the words stuck in my throat. What right did I have? I'd failed to protect her from Deborah, failed to fight for my place in her life. What could I possibly offer her now? And that's when I saw him. A man with a camera, moving stealthily along the side of the church. He raised his lens and took several photos of Evelyn from behind, capturing her slumped shoulders, the tattered veil, the isolation of her vigil. Then he slipped out a side door before she noticed. Later I would discover he worked for the Bridgeport Examiner, a local tabloid known for its sensationalism. The photo would appear in their weekend edition under the headline, "The Jilted Bride, Local Woman Can't Let Go." It would be shared in Facebook groups on Instagram, becoming a meme for pathetic attachment and inability to move on. What no one knew, what no one bothered to find out, was that Evelyn hadn't been jilted. She had been erased, systematically stripped of everything that made her who she was: her hair, her dignity, her future, her identity, just as I had been erased from her childhood. That morning in the church, watching my daughter sitting alone in her grief while a stranger documented it for public amusement, I made my second critical decision. I would not only follow Evelyn, I would find out exactly what had happened to her. And then I would make it right. I just didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole would go, or how many powerful people had reasons to keep my daughter's story buried. As I slipped out of the church before Evelyn could see me, I had no idea that my investigation would uncover medical fraud, identity theft, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Connecticut society. I was just an old man with a bad back and failing kidneys, running on nothing but decades-old regret and newfound determination. But sometimes, that's enough to change everything. Evelyn began visiting St. Vincent's Hospital regularly. I followed her at a distance. One day I heard a doctor call her by name. "Abigail, you can come in now." She had changed her name. Or maybe someone had registered her as someone else. That first visit to St. Vincent's happened 3 weeks after I found her on the sidewalk. I'd been following her daily routine, mornings at the church, afternoons wandering through Seaside Park when the weather permitted, evenings back at the shelter. She rarely spoke to anyone, just existed like a ghost drifting through spaces where the living gathered. But that Tuesday, something changed. She woke earlier than usual, took extra care with her appearance. The wig was combed meticulously, and she'd acquired a clean blouse from somewhere, probably the shelter's donation bin. She walked with purpose, checking her watch repeatedly. St. Vincent's stood like a fortress on the edge of downtown, 12 stories of concrete and glass, neither welcoming nor forbidding, just institutional. I watched Evelyn hesitate at the main entrance, straightening her shoulders before pushing through the revolving door. After counting to 60, I followed. The lobby buzzed with typical hospital chaos, families waiting anxiously, staff bustling between departments, the intercom regularly calling doctors to various emergencies. I spotted Evelyn at the information desk, speaking quietly to a volunteer. The elderly woman pointed toward the elevators and Evelyn nodded her thanks. I kept my distance, pretending to study the directory board while watching which floor she selected. 6th floor. Oncology. My heart stuttered. Cancer? Was my daughter sick? The thought nearly buckled my knees. I'd already lost her mother to breast cancer, a swift, merciless battle that left me a widower with an infant. The idea that Evelyn might face the same enemy. I took the next elevator up, pulse pounding in my temples. The oncology waiting room was painted a soft blue, probably intended to be soothing. It wasn't. Nothing could soothe the cold dread spreading through my chest as I scanned the room for Evelyn. She sat in the corner, hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at a muted television playing a game show. I settled in a chair on the opposite side, hiding behind a tattered Sports Illustrated. Over the top of the magazine, I watched her fidget, glancing repeatedly at the reception desk. After 20 minutes, a nurse appeared at the doorway with a clipboard. "Abigail?" she called. "Abigail Donovan?" Evelyn stood immediately. "That's me." Abigail Donovan, not Evelyn Matthews, not even Evelyn Ashcroft, which would have been her married name. A completely different identity. And she answered to it without hesitation, as if she'd been Abigail her entire life. As she disappeared down the hallway with the nurse, I sat frozen, trying to make sense of it. Had she changed her name to escape the humiliation of the wedding disaster? Or was something more sinister at work? I spent the next hour in that waiting room, mind racing through possibilities. When Evelyn, or Abigail, finally emerged, her face was pale, her movements stiff. She walked straight past me without a glance and returned to the elevators. I didn't follow her immediately. Instead, I approached the reception desk, summoning my most confused elderly expression. "Excuse me," I said to the young woman behind the computer. "I was supposed to meet my niece here, Abigail Donovan. I think I missed her." The receptionist glanced up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "I can't give out patient information, sir." "Oh, I know," I assured her. "I just wondered if you could tell me when her next appointment is." I promised her sister I'd drive her, but I lost the little card with the date. Her expression softened slightly. "I really shouldn't," she began, but then glanced at my weathered face and sighed. "Look, I can tell you she's scheduled for next Tuesday at 2:15, Dr. Michaels, but don't tell anyone I told you." I thanked her and shuffled toward the elevators, heart heavy with questions. What was Evelyn being treated for? And why the name change? The next revelation came as an even greater shock. 2 days later, I followed Evelyn to Bridgeport Elementary School. Standing across the street, I watched through the tall fence as she approached a classroom door. A teacher emerged, smiling warmly, and behind her, a little girl. Blonde, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with bright eyes that lit up at the sight of Evelyn. "Mommy," the child cried, throwing herself into Evelyn's arms. "Mommy." The world tilted beneath my feet. I gripped the fence for support, the metal cold against my fingers. Evelyn had a daughter. I had a granddaughter I never knew existed. I watched, thunderstruck, as Evelyn knelt to the child's level, straightening her little backpack and smoothing her hair. They talked animatedly, the girl gesturing with small hands as she recounted what was clearly an exciting day at school. Evelyn nodded, smiling, really smiling for the first time since I'd found her. This was a different Evelyn than the hollow-eyed woman with the plastic flowers. With her daughter, she was alive, present, connected. The transformation was startling. As they walked away hand in hand, I noticed a woman watching them from a hospital shuttle parked nearby. Young, maybe 30, wearing scrubs under an open coat. She made no move to approach, just observed with an intensity that mirrored my own. When Evelyn and the child had disappeared around the corner, the woman started the shuttle and drove away. I returned to the school the next day, earlier this time, positioned myself on a bench with a clear view of the entrance. The morning bell rang, and parents streamed in with their children. I spotted Evelyn, her wig now secured with a headband, leading the blonde girl by the hand. They stopped at the same classroom, and I heard Evelyn say, "Have a good day, Clara. I'll pick you up at 3. Clara. My granddaughter's name was Clara. The woman in scrubs appeared again, this time sitting beside Evelyn on a bench after Clara had gone inside. They spoke in low voices, heads close together, tension evident in both their postures. Not friends, I decided. Associates in something complicated. The woman passed Evelyn a small envelope, which she quickly tucked into her purse. Then they parted without saying goodbye. I spent the rest of the day processing what I'd seen, sitting in a diner across from the school and drinking cup after cup of bitter coffee. If Evelyn had a daughter, who was the father? And why had no one ever mentioned this child? At the time of the wedding, she hadn't even been pregnant. Or had she? And what about the nurse, because that's what I assumed the woman in scrubs was? Why did she watch Evelyn and Clara like that? What was in that envelope? The questions multiplied, breeding new mysteries with each hour. By the time the dismissal bell rang and I watched Evelyn collect Clara again, I was drowning in speculation and completely devoid of answers. What I did know, with absolute certainty, was that nothing about this situation was what it seemed. My daughter was living under a false name. She had a child no one had mentioned, and she was connected somehow to St. Vincent's Hospital in a way that required secrecy and hushed conversations. I needed to dig deeper, much deeper. What I couldn't possibly have known then was how dangerous those answers would prove to be, or how many powerful people wanted them buried forever. I started investigating everything. An old clerk at the registry office let me see a birth certificate. The child's name was Clara Ashcroft. Father's name, unknown. Mother's name, Abigail D. No surname. The morning after discovering Clara's existence, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. For years, I'd been sleepwalking through life, numbed by loss and regret. Now I had something to fight for. Not just my daughter, but a granddaughter I'd never known existed. The weight of this revelation pressed against my chest as I dressed that morning, my gnarled fingers fumbling with buttons that seemed smaller than they used to be. The county records office opened at 8:30. I was waiting at the door at 8:15, rehearsing my story. The board security guard barely glanced at me as I shuffled past. Just another old man with paperwork to sort out, invisible in my age and shabbiness. The records department was in the basement, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The smell of old paper and dust thick in the air. Behind a chipped laminate counter sat Gerald Hoffman, a clerk I recognized from my days working maintenance for the county. He'd been ancient even then, with wispy white hair and thick glasses that magnified his watery blue eyes. Now he looked practically mummified. "Walter Matthews," he wheezed when he spotted me. "Thought you died years ago." "Not yet," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm working on it." He chuckled, the sound like dry leaves rustling. "What brings you to the tomb of bureaucracy?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Need to look up a birth certificate, Jerry. Family matter." His bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "You know I can't just let you browse. Confidentiality and all that." I slid a $50 bill across the counter. More money than I could really spare, but desperation makes spendthrifts of us all. "It's important, my granddaughter." Jerry studied me for a long moment, then pocketed the bill with arthritic fingers. "Name and date of birth?" "Clara," I said. "I don't know her full name or exact birth date, but she's about 6, maybe 7. Mother's name would be..." I hesitated. "Either Evelyn Matthews or Abigail Donovan." Jerry's eyebrows knitted together. "Two different mothers for one kid?" "It's complicated," I admitted. "Please, Jerry." I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He sighed, then gestured for me to follow him to a computer terminal tucked in a corner. 10 minutes, he muttered. "Then you were never here." I watched over his shoulder as his fingers pecked laboriously at the keyboard. First, he searched for Clara Matthews. Nothing. Then Clara Donovan. Still nothing. "Try Ashcroft," I suggested, the name bitter on my tongue. Jerry typed it in. A single record appeared. Clara Marie Ashcroft, born June 12, 2018. My granddaughter would be nearly 7 now. The timing hit me like a blow, roughly 9 months after the canceled wedding. "Can you open it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Jerry clicked on the record, and the birth certificate appeared on screen. Father's name, unknown. Mother's name, Abigail D. Just Abigail D. No surname. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. If Evelyn had been pregnant at the time of the wedding, wouldn't James Ashcroft be listed as the father? And why the incomplete name? Birth certificates required full legal names. Print it, I said. Jerry hesitated. Walter, that's... Please, I interrupted. She's my granddaughter. Something in my expression must have convinced him. With a resigned sigh, he hit the print button. As the ancient printer wheezed to life, he turned to me. Whatever you're mixed up in, be careful. These records get audited, questions get asked. I nodded, folding the warm paper carefully and tucking it into my jacket pocket. Thanks, Jerry. I owe you. Damn right you do, he muttered, but there was sympathy in his rheumy eyes. Outside, I studied the document more carefully. There were inconsistencies beyond the missing surname. The hospital listed was St. Vincent's, but the attending physician, Dr. L. Michaels, was the same doctor Evelyn was seeing now for oncology appointments. Why would an oncologist deliver a baby? My next stop was the homeless shelter where Evelyn stayed. I'd become a familiar sight there over the past weeks, occasionally volunteering to help serve meals or clean up. The staff assumed I was just another retiree with time to spare. They didn't question when I lingered in the common areas or offered to take out the trash. That afternoon, I waited until the day shift manager stepped away from the desk before slipping into the small back office. The filing cabinets were unlocked. Security wasn't a priority in a place running on donations and goodwill. I quickly located Evelyn's intake form. Name, Abigail Donovan. Previous address, none provided emergency contact, none provided medical conditions, recovering from surgery. No details, nothing helpful. But as I was replacing the file, I noticed the trash can beside the desk was full of discarded papers. A flash of yellow caught my eye. A torn envelope with Evelyn's shelter ID number scrawled in the corner. I fished it out, my heart racing. It was a court summons, partially shredded but still legible in places. Evelyn, or rather, Abigail Donovan, was being called to testify in a case involving the Ashcroft Foundation. It concerned documents signed by an employee who had disappeared, and Evelyn was cited as a backstage witness. The date of the hearing had passed already, yesterday in fact. Had Evelyn gone? Is that why she'd been so careful with her appearance that morning? I slipped the torn summons into my pocket alongside the birth certificate, replacing it with crumpled junk mail from my own pocket to disguise the theft. Then I hurried out, nodding casually to the returning manager. My next move was riskier. The Ashcroft Foundation headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Bridgeport. Their medical supply business had expanded over the years to include pharmaceuticals, home health care services, and medical research funding. Darlene Ashcroft's empire, built on the suffering of others. At least, that's how I'd come to see it. I couldn't exactly walk in and start asking questions, but I could get to the maintenance staff. After decades of janitorial and building maintenance work, I knew the invisible army that kept places like this running. They saw everything, heard everything, and were seldom noticed by the people they served. I positioned myself in the small cafe across from the service entrance, nursing a cup of coffee until late afternoon when the day cleaning crew emerged. I recognized the type immediately, mostly immigrants, tired from hours of thankless labor. I approached an older man who'd separated from the group to smoke a cigarette. "Tough day?" I asked, offering him a light. He shrugged, accepting the flame. "Same as always." We chatted about nothing: the weather, the bus schedule, the rising cost of everything. I let slip that I used to work maintenance in office buildings like that one. This created an immediate bond, the camaraderie of those who clean up after others. "You looking for work?" he asked eventually. "They always need people." I shook my head. Not anymore. But my niece applied for a receptionist job there. Abigail. Blonde girl, wears a wig. You seen her around? His expression shifted, became guarded. The crying lady? She got fired yesterday. Fired? She worked there? He took a long drag on his cigarette. Temp, front desk on 18. But she got into it with the big boss lady, the old one with the scary eyes. Everyone heard the shouting. Then security took her out. Darlene Ashcroft. Evelyn had confronted her former mother-in-law. What were they fighting about? I pressed. He shrugged again. Don't know, don't care, but the old lady's been crazy since. Yelling at everyone, firing people left and right. Something about old papers and a dead doctor. He checked his watch. Look, I gotta catch my bus. I thanked him and watched him hurry away, my mind racing. Evelyn had worked at the Ashcroft Foundation? Under her false name? And what dead doctor? What papers? The pieces were starting to connect, but the picture they formed made no sense. A child with an unknown father. A court summons about missing documents. An oncologist who delivered babies. A confrontation with Darlene Ashcroft. And at the center of it all, my daughter, living under a false name with a child no one had mentioned. A woman who, according to her birth certificate, didn't quite exist. A week later, Evelyn disappeared. The child remained in the nurse's care. I went looking. I discovered that Evelyn had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital, but she was registered under a different name. I'll never forget the moment I realized she was gone. It was a Tuesday morning, the day of her scheduled oncology appointment. I'd positioned myself in the hospital lobby, tucked behind a fake potted palm, waiting to catch a glimpse of her. 2 o'clock came and went. Then 3. By 4, a cold dread had settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. I returned to the shelter on Maple Avenue, only to find her bed stripped bare, her few possessions gone. The night manager, a kind-eyed woman named Letitia, noticed my distress. "Looking for Abigail?" she asked, folding sheets with practiced efficiency. She checked out 3 days ago, didn't say where she was going. 3 days. She'd been gone for 3 days, and I hadn't known. The realization struck me like a physical blow. I'd failed her again, just when I was getting close to understanding what had happened. "Did she take her daughter?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Letitia gave me an odd look. "Abigail doesn't have a daughter who stays here." "Of course not. Clara lived somewhere else, somewhere stable, away from the desperate atmosphere of the shelter. But where? And with whom?" I spent the next day canvassing Bridgeport Elementary, waiting for school dismissal. When the bell rang, students poured out into the yard, a riot of colorful backpacks and high-pitched voices. I scanned the crowd anxiously, searching for Clara's blonde head. There, by the swings. The little girl stood uncertainly, clutching her lunchbox as other children were claimed by waiting parents. After several minutes, I spotted the nurse from before hurrying across the playground. Clara's face lit up with recognition, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. I followed them at a careful distance as they walked to a modest apartment complex 6 blocks away. The nurse ushered Clara inside, glancing nervously over her shoulder before closing the door. She knew something was wrong, too. That night, I camped out in my car across from the complex, watching her unit. Around midnight, the nurse emerged alone, climbed into a Honda Civic, and drove toward St. Vincent's. I had a choice to make: follow her or stay with Clara. I chose the nurse. She led me straight to Bridgeport Psychiatric, an imposing brick building on the outskirts of town that locals simply called the Institute. I watched her flash an ID at the night guard and disappear inside. 20 minutes later, she emerged, visibly upset, wiping at her eyes. The next day, I returned to the Institute wearing my old maintenance uniform and carrying a toolbox. Amazing how people stop seeing you when you look like you're there to fix something. I walked right past the reception desk, nodding confidently at the security guard. "Sink on 3rd floor," I muttered. He barely glanced up from his newspaper. On the 3rd floor, I paused at the nurse's station, pretending to check a clipboard I'd brought. A young nurse looked up inquiringly. Need to check the sink in room 317, I said. Work order says it's leaking. She frowned. That's odd. 317 is a patient room, not a bathroom. I feigned confusion, scratching my head. Maybe I read it wrong. Who's in 317? I'll check if they've reported plumbing issues. She glanced at her computer. Patricia Miller, admitted 3 days ago under Section 12. Not Evelyn, not Abigail. A third name. Is she the young lady with the wig? I asked casually. Front desk mentioned something about being careful not to disturb her headpiece. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that's her. But she's in therapy now, so you'll have to come back. Bingo. I thanked her and left, heart pounding. Evelyn was here, under yet another false name, held under Section 12, involuntary psychiatric commitment. Someone had deemed her a danger to herself or others. Someone powerful enough to make it happen with no questions asked. I needed access to her belongings, to find any clue about what was really happening. But how? The answer came to me as I drove past the hospital's loading dock. A sign advertised an immediate opening for a night custodian. By that evening, I was employed by Bridgeport Psychiatric, assigned to clean the administrative wing from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. For 3 nights, I did my job meticulously, establishing myself as reliable but unremarkable. On the 4th night, I made my move. Patient belongings were stored in a locked room near the intake area. The key hung in the security office where Hank, the night guard, typically dozed through his shift. I brought him coffee laced with 2 crushed sleeping pills from my own prescription. Within 30 minutes, he was snoring loudly, the key ring unattended on his desk. The storage room was organized alphabetically by patient name. I found the bin labeled Miller P and rifled through its meager contents. The clothes she'd been wearing when admitted, a worn purse, a dog-eared paperback. At the bottom of the purse, I found a small brass key with the number 19B stamped on it, a safe deposit box. But at which bank? I returned everything exactly as I'd found it and replaced the key before Hank could wake up. The next morning, I began visiting every bank in Bridgeport, asking if they had boxes numbered in the teens with a B designation. It took 3 days. Bridgeport Savings and Trust, an old stone building downtown with brass fixtures and hushed voices. Yes, they had a box 19B. No, I couldn't access it without proper authorization. I waited outside for hours, watching customers come and go, formulating a plan. By closing time, I'd settled on my approach. Risky, potentially illegal, but I was beyond caring about such things. The following day, I returned wearing my best clothes, a dark suit I'd bought for a cousin's funeral years ago, now hanging loose on my thinning frame. I approached the manager's desk with a practiced expression of grief. I need to access my daughter's safe deposit box, I said, my voice carefully modulated to suggest deep emotion. She passed last month, cancer. The manager, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, offered condolences. Of course, Mr. Donovan, I replied. Richard Donovan. My daughter was Abigail. She nodded, tapping at her computer. I'll need to see your ID, Mr. Donovan, and the death certificate. I produced my driver's license, Walter Matthews, not Richard Donovan, and a document I'd spent all night creating using a template downloaded at the public library. It wasn't a perfect forgery, but I hoped it would pass a cursory inspection. She frowned slightly at the ID. The names don't match. Divorced, I explained quickly. I kept my ex-wife's name for business reasons. The death certificate has my legal name. She studied the certificate, and for a moment I thought she'd see through the deception. But grief makes people uncomfortable. She wanted to believe me, to help the sad old man complete this difficult task. Do you have the key, Mr. Donovan? I patted my pockets in a show of confusion, then shook my head. I thought, isn't there a master key? She explained the bank would need a court order to drill the box without the customer's key. I let my shoulders slump in defeat. I understand. It's just, there might be a letter in there. For her daughter. My granddaughter. I let my voice break slightly. Clara should have something from her mother. The name struck a chord. Recognition flickered in the manager's eyes. Clara? Little blonde girl? I nodded, hope surging. You've met her? Abigail brought her in once, sweet child. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Mr. Donovan, I shouldn't do this, but wait here. She disappeared into a back office. Minutes stretched like hours. When she returned, she slid a form across the desk. If you can provide Clara's birth certificate listing you as next of kin, we can process an emergency access request. I had the birth certificate in my pocket, the one from the county records, but it didn't list me as anything. Nevertheless, I handed it over. The manager studied it, frowning at the unknown father and incomplete mother's name. She seemed about to refuse when another customer approached her desk with a question. As she turned to address them, I glimpsed a ring of keys on her belt. In a moment of pure desperation, I reached across the desk and unhooked them while she was distracted. The move was so brazen, so unlike my usual cautious approach that I shocked even myself. But sometimes the most obvious action is the least expected. I'll get those other documents and come back, I said loudly, standing. She nodded absently, still engaged with the other customer. Heart-pounding, I walked calmly toward the vault area, where another employee was assisting a customer with their box. I waited patiently, keys concealed in my palm, projecting the aura of a man with every right to be there. When the employee stepped away briefly, I moved quickly to the wall of metal doors, located 19B, and inserted the key. It turned smoothly. Inside was a single envelope, typewritten, signed by Franklin Ashcroft, husband of Darlene and father of the groom. The will was clear. He left part of his fortune to any legitimate descendant, born of a union recognized by a religious witness. Evelyn's daughter was the only one. I photographed the document with the cheap prepaid phone I'd bought for this purpose, then replaced it exactly as I'd found it. On my way out, I managed to return the keys to the manager's desk without detection. Later, studying the photos in my rented room, I began to understand the true dimensions of the conspiracy against my daughter, and why so many powerful people wanted her silenced. I entered the Ashcroft house with a copy of the will in my hand. I pretended to be a lawyer. I asked for a conversation with Darlene. She looked at me with the same contempt with which she had once looked at Evelyn. She said it was all theatrics from defeated people. The Ashcroft estate sprawled across 3 acres in the wealthiest part of Fairfield County. A gated fortress of old money and new resentments. It took me 2 days just to figure out how to get inside. The answer came, as it often does, through the service entrance. The family was hosting a charity gala that weekend, one of those events where the rich congratulate themselves for donating a fraction of their wealth while drinking champagne that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I went to a thrift store and bought the best suit I could find, navy blue with only slight wear at the cuffs. A red tie, polished shoes. I spent an hour in front of my cracked bathroom mirror, practicing how to stand straighter, speak more authoritatively. The transformation wasn't perfect, but with the documents tucked into a leather portfolio I'd splurged on, I might pass for what I was pretending to be, an attorney with news too important to wait. The day of the gala arrived, a crisp October afternoon with leaves turning golden on the massive oaks lining the Ashcrofts' driveway. I parked my rusted Buick several blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, joining the stream of delivery vans and catering trucks being waved through the service gate. I nodded confidently to the security guard, muttering something about final contract details as I clutched my portfolio. Once inside, I navigated through the controlled chaos of event preparation. Staff hurried in every direction, carrying floral arrangements, hanging decorations, polishing already gleaming surfaces. Nobody questioned my presence. In spaces like this, confidence is its own credential. I found a quiet hallway and waited, checking my watch periodically as if expecting someone. My heart hammered against my ribs, and sweat dampened my collar despite the building's perfect climate control. What I was attempting was, by any measure, insane. One phone call from the Ashcrofts could send me to jail. But when you have nothing left to lose, risk becomes an abstract concept. After nearly an hour, I spotted her, Darlene Ashcroft, striding down the hallway in a tailored pantsuit, barking orders into a cell phone. Even in her 70s, she emanated a cold authority that made staff members scatter from her path. I straightened my tie and stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashcroft? A moment of your time, please." She paused, irritation flashing across her surgically tightened features. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" I offered a business card I'd printed at the library. Richard Donovan, attorney at law, with a Connecticut Bar Association number I'd looked up online. "I represent certain interests in the matter of Franklin Ashcroft's estate," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's urgent we speak privately." She studied the card, then my face, suspicion evident in her narrowed eyes. "My husband's estate was settled years ago." "New information has come to light," I replied. "Information that impacts the disbursement of assets under Section 4.3 of his will." The specific reference caught her attention. After a moment's hesitation, she gestured toward a door. "My office. 5 minutes." Her office reflected her personality, all hard edges and cold efficiency. No family photos, no personal touches, just awards, business journals, and a large portrait of her late husband looking stern in an oil painting. She didn't offer me a seat. "What's this about?" I removed the copy of the will from my portfolio and placed it on her glass desk. Section 4.3 specifically designates a portion of Franklin Ashcroft's estate, approximately $40 million at current valuation, to any legitimate descendant born of a union recognized by a religious witness. Darlene's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of her desk. And Clara Ashcroft qualifies under that provision." Her laugh was sharp, dismissive. "That child? She's the product of a one-night stand. My son never married that gold-digging nurse." I kept my face impassive, though her words about my daughter and granddaughter burned like acid. "I believe you're mistaken," I said, withdrawing another document, a photograph of a simple marriage certificate. James Ashcroft and Evelyn Matthews were married in a private religious ceremony 3 weeks before the planned public wedding. The officiant was Reverend Thomas Grayson of First Baptist Church. This was a calculated gamble. I had no proof such a ceremony had occurred. But the night before, I'd spoken with the nurse who cared for Clara, a woman named Rachel Liu, who'd finally agreed to meet me after weeks of my persistent messages. She'd revealed that Evelyn had mentioned a private ceremony, just in case something happened, a backup plan that proved prescient. "That's absurd," Darlene snapped. "No such ceremony took place." "The Reverend's sworn statement suggests otherwise," I bluffed, as does the timing of Clara's birth, precisely 9 months after the date on this certificate. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Darlene's face. "Even if such a ceremony occurred, which it didn't, it would have no legal standing without proper filing. Religious recognition is the only requirement specified in your husband's will," I countered. "And he was very specific about the wording, wasn't he? Almost as if he anticipated someone might try to circumvent his wishes." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Who are you, really? You're no attorney." I straightened to my full height, abandoning pretense. "Someone who knows what you did to Evelyn Matthews, someone who knows why you've gone to such lengths to erase her, and why you're so desperate to keep Clara from claiming what's rightfully hers." Darlene's laugh was cold, brittle. "This is all theater from defeated people. That woman is mentally unstable, diagnosed with delusional disorder. No court would give her custody of a child, let alone control of a trust fund." "A convenient diagnosis," I noted. "Especially when the doctor who signed the commitment papers is on the Ashcroft Foundation payroll." Her smile faltered slightly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I think I do," I replied quietly. "A woman who drugged and assaulted her son's bride, who used her wealth and influence to have that same woman committed to a psychiatric facility under a false name, who's been systematically erasing every trace of Evelyn Matthews' existence to prevent her granddaughter from inheriting what Franklin intended her to have. For a moment, rage twisted Darlene's features into something barely human. Then, with visible effort, she composed herself. "Security will show you out," she said, reaching for the phone on her desk. But before she could dial, I mentioned the name of the reverend who performed the symbolic union between Evelyn and her son, a ceremony held informally before the official wedding. The smile disappeared from her face. She knew that this had legal value. "You can have me removed," I said calmly. "But copies of these documents have already been delivered to the executor of Franklin's estate, and to the district attorney's office, and to 3 different journalists." This was another bluff, but one rooted in enough truth to be credible. I had indeed mailed copies to several addresses earlier that day, though not to anyone with the power Darlene wielded. She set the phone down slowly. "What do you want? Money?" I shook my head. "Justice for Evelyn, freedom from the psychiatric hold you arranged, and recognition of Clara's rights under the will." "That's not possible," she said flatly. "Too much is at stake." "Like the Ashcroft Foundation? The medical research grants? The pharmaceutical patents?" I was fishing, using fragments of information gleaned from news articles and Rachel Liu's reluctant revelations. Something I said struck home. Darlene's expression shifted subtly, confirming I'd stumbled onto something significant. "You really don't understand what you're meddling with," she said quietly. "This goes beyond money, beyond one insignificant woman and her bastard child." "Try me," I challenged. But at that moment, the door opened. James Ashcroft, Evelyn's former fiancé, Clara's father, stood in the doorway. He looked older than his 30-some years, strain evident in the lines around his mouth. "Mother? They need you for the—" He stopped short, noticing me. "Who's this?" "No one important," Darlene said smoothly. "A solicitor who got past security." James frowned, studying me more carefully. Something like recognition flickered in his eyes. "Have we met?" "No," I replied. "But I know your daughter Clara. She has your eyes." The color drained from his face. He turned to his mother. "You said you'd handled this. You promised me it was over." "It is over," Darlene hissed. "This man is no one. Nothing." But James wasn't listening. He was staring at the documents spread across Darlene's desk, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Is that father's will? The inheritance clause?" Before Darlene could respond, security arrived. 2 burly men in dark suits with earpieces. "Problem, Mrs. Ashcroft. Remove this man," she ordered, "and call the police. He's trespassing." As they gripped my arms, I looked directly at James. "Your daughter deserves to know her father, and Evelyn deserves the truth." They dragged me out through a side door, away from the arriving guests. But not before I saw the conflict in James's face and the fury in Darlene's. That night, the police did come to my rented room. I expected arrest. Instead, they delivered a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Meet me tomorrow, First Baptist Church, noon, J.A." And beneath it, in different handwriting, "Mom, I forgive you. Because what you took from me, I got back through pain. Today is the last day I have strength to speak. The cancer has advanced too far. But before I go, I asked the nurse to take me to the square where Evelyn used to sit in a white veil, waiting for a wedding that never happened. The doctors gave me 6 months. That was 9 months ago. Pure stubbornness has kept me breathing this long. That and the need to see things through to the end. My body is failing rapidly now. Each breath feels like inhaling broken glass, and the morphine barely touches the pain that has become my constant companion. But my mind remains clear, and for that small mercy I am grateful. I met James Ashcroft at First Baptist Church as his note requested. He was already there when I arrived, sitting alone in the last pew, the same one where I'd watched Evelyn in her tattered veil all those months ago. Life has a strange way of bringing us full circle. James looked nothing like the polished young man from the engagement photos. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He didn't look up as I slid into the pew beside him. "How did you find her?" he asked after a long silence, his voice barely audible above the distant sound of the organist practicing. "I never lost her," I replied. "Not really." He nodded slowly, still staring straight ahead at the empty altar. "You're her father." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes. She spoke about you sometimes. Before—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Before everything went wrong." The admission startled me. All these years I'd believed Deborah had thoroughly erased me from Evelyn's memory. To learn that my daughter had spoken of me, had remembered me at all, sent a wave of emotion through my chest so powerful it momentarily eclipsed the constant pain. "What did she say?" I asked, trying and failing to keep the desperate hope from my voice. James finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "That you used to read to her every night. That you smelled like pine soap and coffee. That you taught her to fold paper cranes when she was scared." Memories I'd thought lost forever, preserved in my daughter's mind and shared with this stranger. I pressed my fist against my mouth, fighting for composure. "I never wanted to hurt her," James continued after I'd collected myself. "You have to believe that. I loved her, still love her. But my mother—" He shook his head. "You don't say no to Darlene Ashcroft. You stood by while she drugged and assaulted your fiancé," I said, an edge creeping into my voice despite my efforts. "You let her commit Evelyn to a psychiatric facility under a false name. You abandoned your own daughter." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "I didn't know about what happened the night before the wedding, not until after. And by then, Evelyn was gone. Mother said she'd had a breakdown, that she needed professional help." "And you believed that?" "I wanted to," he admitted, shame evident in every line of his face. "It was easier than facing what Mother was capable of. By the time I learned Evelyn was pregnant, Mother had already arranged everything. New identity documents, medical care at a private facility, financial support contingent on Evelyn's silence." He paused, his expression haunted. "She told me Evelyn had agreed to give up the baby, that a clean break was best for everyone." "But Evelyn kept Clara," I said. James nodded. "The only act of defiance she could manage. She disappeared with the baby before the adoption papers could be signed. Mother was— I've never seen her so angry." He shuddered at the memory. "She spent years tracking them down. Years and millions of dollars, all to protect the Ashcroft name. And the foundation." "What about the foundation?" I pressed, sensing we were approaching the heart of the matter. James hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "My father's research," he said finally. "The medical patents that built our fortune. They weren't his." And then the story came pouring out. A decades-old theft of intellectual property. Franklin Ashcroft, a businessman with medical connections but no scientific background, had appropriated research from a brilliant young doctor at St. Vincent's. A doctor who conveniently died in a car accident before he could expose the fraud. A doctor named Michael Donovan. "Abigail Donovan," I murmured, understanding dawning. "Michael's daughter?" James nodded. "They grew up together, Evelyn and Abigail. Their fathers worked at the same hospital. After Michael's death, his wife moved away with their daughter. But Evelyn never forgot her friend. When she needed to disappear, she became Abigail," I finished. "To honor her friend and to hide from your mother. And to access the trust," James added. "Father was plagued by guilt in his final years. He set up a trust fund for Michael's descendants, reparations he could never make publicly without exposing the fraud. When Evelyn discovered this, while working as a temp at the foundation, Darlene realized she could expose everything," I said. "The stolen research, the fraudulent patents, possibly even Michael's death." James just nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "The foundation funds hospitals across 3 states. Thousands of jobs, millions in research grants. Mother convinced herself that protecting it justified anything, even destroying Evelyn. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Evelyn, is she still at the institute?" "No," James said. "I had her transferred to a private facility upstate. Better care, more comfort. Mother doesn't know. It's the only thing I've ever kept from her." "And Clara?" "With the nurse, Rachel. She's paid well to keep Clara safe and secret." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "This contains everything. Legal documents recognizing me as Clara's father, access to a trust fund in her name, the location where Evelyn is being treated." He placed it in my hands. "I'm leaving the country tonight, going somewhere Mother can't reach me until I figure out how to make this right." I studied his face. This weak, privileged man who had failed my daughter so completely, yet might be her only hope for justice. "Why give this to me? Why now?" "Because you found her when no one else was looking," he said simply. "Because you never stopped trying to protect her, even when it seemed impossible." He stood, straightening his shoulders with what looked like enormous effort. "And because Evelyn would want Clara to know her grandfather." After he left, I sat in that empty church for a long time, the envelope heavy in my hands. Then I went to see my granddaughter. Clara was exactly as I'd glimpsed her before, bright-eyed, curious, with something of her mother's determined chin. Rachel, the nurse, was initially suspicious but softened when I showed her the documents and explained who I was. She'd been Evelyn's friend at nursing school, she told me, had helped her escape when Darlene's net began to close, had promised to keep Clara safe until Evelyn could return. "Will she?" Rachel asked, her eyes worried. "Return?" I didn't know how to answer that. The reports from the facility were mixed, progress followed by setbacks, moments of clarity overwhelmed by confusion. Years of trauma and forced medication had taken their toll. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I visited Clara regularly, told her stories about her mother as a little girl, started teaching her to fold paper cranes. And every Sunday I visited Evelyn at the facility upstate, sitting beside her bed while she stares out the window, rarely speaking, often not seeming to recognize me at all. Until yesterday. I was reading to her from an old book of poetry, something she'd loved as a child, when she suddenly turned to me, her eyes clear and focused. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. And just like that, after decades of loss, I had my daughter back. For one perfect moment. The doctors say it happens sometimes with patients like Evelyn, brief windows of lucidity that close as quickly as they open. They warned me not to expect it again. But I've never been good at managing expectations. Today, the nurse from the hospice helped me dress, wheeled me to the car service I'd arranged. It's taken most of my remaining strength, but I had to come here, to the park bench where Evelyn used to sit in her veil, watching other brides live the life that should have been hers. And now, miraculously, she's here too, released for a supervised day trip that cost me the last of my savings to arrange. She doesn't recognize me today, doesn't speak, but she sits beside me on this bench, her hand occasionally brushing against mine. Silently, I place a small box in her lap. Inside, the key to the safe deposit box, and an old photo, her on my lap, still a baby. I don't tell her who I am. I don't need to. She smiles with tear-filled eyes. And for the first time, I see Evelyn as she was before. They say the last gift anyone can give is truth, but sometimes it's forgiveness. Tomorrow I won't be here. The cancer will finally claim what's left of me. But Clara will have the trust fund. Evelyn will have the care she needs. And somewhere in the world, James Ashcroft might find the courage to do what his father never could. Make amends. As for me, I've done what I set out to do. I found my daughter. I protected my granddaughter. I uncovered the truth. Some might call that justice, I call it love. As Walter's story comes to a close, I want you to ask yourself, what would you have done in his place? When the world conspires to erase someone you love, when powerful people use their influence to destroy lives, would you have the courage to stand against them? Even when your body is failing, even when the odds seem impossible, would you fight until your last breath for the truth? Sometimes the most profound acts of love happen in silence. A father following his daughter through rain-soaked streets, an old man sitting on a bench day after day, waiting for a moment of recognition that might never come. Walter's journey reminds us that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the harm done to us. It's about refusing to let that harm determine who we become. In the end, the greatest gift we can offer isn't vengeance or even justice. It's the simple, stubborn refusal to stop loving someone, even when they've forgotten how to love themselves. If this story touched you, if Walter's struggle to reconnect with Evelyn in the face of unimaginable obstacles made you reflect on your own relationships, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human experience, the heartbreak and the healing, the loss and the love that follows. Remember, as Walter discovered, sometimes the people who seem most broken are the ones with the most to teach us about what it means to be whole.